kind of burned through all the cool nerds when they asked me to do this, because they got Will Wheaton, they got Jaffe, and they're like, oh, I guess we'll finally go with Cliffy. I mean, I was honestly expecting to do like PAX Midwest in 2034 or something like this. And I mean, it means a lot for me to do this keynote. I mean, wait, story time. That's why we actually have the cozy fire on my slide deck. And gather around. And when I decided I want to tell a story, I thought about everything that I've done and everything I've said in my life, and I decided that it's time to get personal. I want to tell you a personal story. Dun, dun, dun. And for me, nothing, you can't see the slides? Now imagine I'm showing you a slide of New England. Very picturesque, covered bridges and things like that. So now that that's in your head, you can Google image that, by the way. Nothing for me is more personal than New England, because guys, I grew up about 30 minutes away from here. It was, oh, we got some wicked retarded people in the crowd. Go to the Cumberland Farms and get some beer. It was a wonderful town called North Andover, and it was a great place, very near and dear to my heart, right there on Russet Lane. And it was really a fantastic American childhood, filled with kick the can and, there we go. Oh, isn't it lovely? I'm surprised nobody's set more video games here, by the way, but that's free to take. So I had a great childhood filled with paper routes, kick the can, and collecting all sorts of reptiles and amphibians. There was not a summer day I was not knee-deep in some disgustingly fetid swamp. It's amazing I did not get malaria or something like that. I love the idea of using my imagination from an early age. I mean, growing up in North Andover, I was fortunate enough to have a really large yard. And in that backyard, there was a clearing up on the hill. And in that clearing, somebody, for some reason, I have no idea why, had discarded like 9 to 10 old tires. And I decided every day before school during the warm months, clearly there's not a lot here, I would go and lift up the tires and look for snakes. And at half the time, I would find one, and I would take these snakes, and I would keep them as pets in the house. Usually the basement, mind you. But my mother really never knew about this. I never told her. The funny thing was, some of those snakes kind of escaped, and we never found them, but luckily nobody ever got bit. And thankfully, by the way, as a kid, I knew to actually do my homework to know which snakes were venomous and which ones were not, otherwise I would not be here with you guys today. So there it is, that's the actual satellite view of the house. I could lie and tell you we had a poor upbringing and I went uphill both ways in snow, but honestly, we did okay. We had a middle-class existence. My dad worked at Polaroid over in Cambridge. He actually worked on some of those holograms that you have in your license today. And I wonder if those tires are still up there in the clearing, and if the kid who lives there goes up there and looks around. And you can see how this kind of started connecting to my love of Zelda and hidden passages and what's in the box and that kind of sense of mystery that I get from video games. So honestly, PAX, I'm a dreamer. I really am. My wife can attest to the fact that I'm not a good sleeper. I'm a light sleeper. I never have slept well my entire life. When I was a child, I hated getting up at the crack of dawn to go to school. I remember nodding off in class and on the bus. It was really, until third period, I was completely useless. And I've always had these crazy dreams ever since I was a boy. Those of you who've done your homework on the history of the games I've done know I did an entire trilogy about that when I was a teenager. There it is. Yeah, look at those graphics. So this is a game called, obviously, Dare to Dream, which wound up being the name of Yanni's tour later, which is a weird sign. And even back then, I knew the importance of branding and logos. I mean, look, I had a logo that you could tattoo in yourself. I had this, like, this is the precursor on the right to the Crimson Omen, by the way. It's like Justin Bieber's being attacked by demons or something. I have no idea what it means. I think there's Comic Sans in there, too. So I've even gotten better at lucid dreaming lately. For those of you that don't know, lucid dreaming is when you're in the dream and you're like, wait a minute, I'm dreaming. I can control this. And if you've ever had it happen, it's an amazing thing. And since I've gotten better at it, I'm going to be honest, half the time I wind up flying. I mean, that's my thing. I just go, boop, see you guys later. And this is one of the reasons why I'm in love with the Oculus Rift. For me, I think we're moving more and more towards that ultimate fantasy experience of what you're essentially living the dream with that level of immersion. And I think hopefully once this becomes a mainstream item and we have multiplayer games for it, we can all share the dream together. Hopefully not the nightmare. So speaking of dreams, I'm going to go back to some of my earliest video game memories. I had to edit this slide because my lovely wife reminded me that PAX is very family friendly, and I curse like a sailor, so if a couple sneak out, I'm sorry, try to earmuffs your kids. We used to have these magical places called arcades. They were really incredible spots to visit. If you had $5 of change, you'd just go to the change machine and you'd put it in, you'd feel like you won a Vegas slot. Just dozens of tokens or quarters would come out and you just fill your pockets with it and go have an amazing time. These machines would just beckon to you to go to another world or, yes, of course, save yet another princess. Skee ball, for some reason, was always the loudest, but nobody ever played that crap. It's true. Arcades were usually regulated in the 80s to the food court, right? That was where, you had your Orange Julius's and your crappy mall pizza. And to this day, when I smell that, I go back there, and it reminds me of those experiences. My arcade was called the Dream Machine, and it was a chain of them, if I recall. I Googled it. I thought it was my own one over there in Methuen, but there was plenty of them. They knocked down that mall. There's a place, the mini mall there called the Loop now, but for me, it was my magical gateway for a lot of these things. It was sensory overload even. I mean, it was very intimidating to go into this place as like a 7-year-old and hear all this noise and see all this stuff going on. And just when things started to get boring, they'd roll in a new machine that you could just jam on for hours. Crystal Castles, Galaga, Galaxian, and Dragon's Lair, the original triumph of graphics over gameplay. QuickTime event, QuickTime event, QuickTime event. And the final nail in the coffin for that game is going to be the fact that we're going to be playing it until the year 3000. It's going to keep being released on holographic mode and everything like that. These were really the original quarter munchers. These were the original microtransactions, and I couldn't get enough of them. To this day, I'm thrilled about the fact that I can actually afford to get a Ms. Pac-Man cocktail machine in my basement. I'm just going to look at it and be like, oh my god, I have my own arcade. And so arcades really started my love affair with gaming, and I'll always have some incredibly fond memories of them. It's now time to talk about my love of Nintendo. I think some of you like it too, judging by the DSs I saw earlier. And you notice, of course, this is my name in the first issue of Nintendo Power for a Super Mario Bros. High score. So many of you have heard the story about how I was at a friend's house and I was playing the Atari 2600 and I knew right there and then I wanted to make games. And that was really the start of it. But when things really started to gestate was when I got my hands on the Nintendo Entertainment System. I didn't know much about it at the time. Honestly, after the video game crash, I stopped playing games for like a year, until one day, this kid named P.T. Luther, who lived down the road from me on Russet Lane, got his Nintendo. He got the full set. He got Rob, he got the Zapper and everything. He was that kid that got every freaking toy, and I'm still jealous of it to this day. Oh, good, we got the lights lowered. So, he was the kid also who got the 7-foot G.I. Joe aircraft carrier. Little bastard. I want one of these now. I want to get one of these and have it shellacked as like my coffee table in the house. This thing was to scale. And the irony of you using American military might for toys is beyond me. But anyway, the whole point is, I'd get off school before him because I was an older kid. He was a younger kid. And I would literally sit outside his house for an hour or two in the rain waiting for him to come home. His mom would come home. She'd cook us some cheese-like substance, some curd thing, which was, I guess, went for cheese, and we'd eat nachos and play Super Mario Brothers and Ghosts and Goblins and Duck Hunt. And to this day, when I go to a movie theater, they offer those same crappy nachos, and I watch a movie, I still go back to the Mushroom Kingdom. My love affair with Nintendo came in full bloom in 7th grade, right around the time my acne bloomed. And people have heard me talk about bullying before. I like to talk about it. I think it should be spoken about. But people sometimes assume that it happened to me in high school. That really wasn't the case. By the time I was in high school, the Accutane had kicked in. I learned how to be kind of funny. I was involved in drama. No, that wasn't really it. It was junior high that was the pain in the ass. 7th grade, in fact. I worshipped Nintendo back then so much. I'd buy anything Nintendo. They're at the point where this comic was put outside the computer lab. And for those of you who remember The Far Side, which was amazing in the era of course, Calvin and Hobbes, this was hopeful parents looking at their goofy little son playing Nintendo, and they're imagining the want ads in the 2000s saying, "Can you rescue the princess? High salary and benefits." And it was ha ha ha, this is so funny at the time, and actually it turned out to be true. This was the start of a very rough time for me. I'm going to need some water for this. I don't want to go into too many of the gory details, just a couple of moments that stick out for me. There's one time on the school bus where some kid who didn't like me stuck gum in my hair, just minding my own business. And I didn't know how to remove it, so when I got home that day, I was a bit of a latchkey kid, thank God for Nintendo, or I would have wound up on meth or something. And I proceeded to cut the gum out of my hair and looked really goofy for about a month until it came in, because, fun fact, if you take anything away from this takeaway, if you ever get gum in your hair, use peanut butter. Peanut butter takes it right out. I didn't know it at the time, and I looked like I just had used a Flowbee on my head or something. The school bus back then was absolute anarchy. We didn't have the bus monitors y'all had. It was just that some driver guy like the dude from The Simpsons, hey man, we're gonna hit some bumps, right? It was literally Lord of the Flies or that old prison show Oz. Every man for himself. Now, the second moment that stands out to me was the last day of school in the 7th grade. This older kid comes up to me, takes his Coke and shakes it up and dumps the entire thing on my head in front of everybody. It was really a classic Carrie moment. And by the way, the remake's coming out with Chloe Moretz. It looks fabulous. You know, I wasn't very cool in 7th grade. I didn't have gotcha. 14-year-old boys, you guys are good. Go back to your Nintendos. And I'm sitting here thinking, I knew exactly what the hell I was doing the entire time. It tried me as an adult, I guess. Needless to say, the Ninja Clan was disbanded, but the one thing was, I was scared straight. I rarely got into trouble after that. I really didn't want to deal with any of that crap. And this was my lesson in learning the difference between fantasy and reality. It's now time to talk about the 1990 Nintendo propaganda. I'm sorry, Nintendo World Championships. So the next major incident, the Nintendo World Championships, came up in my life. I'll get there in a second, but I want to first set it up about my friendship with Ralph Barbagallo. See, before Ralph, I loved Nintendo. I wouldn't cheat on Nintendo. Nintendo was my wife. And Ralph's like, dude, there's other games out there. He introduced me to the Commodore 64, the Sega Genesis, all these other games. More importantly, Ralph, I thank you because you taught me the difference between a good game and a crappy game, which was one of the major skills I would use later as a game designer. And not just that, Ralph also taught me about pop culture. He taught me about NWA and this mysterious place called Compton in California. Straight outta. He taught me about Evil Dead and showed me the Evil Dead movies and all these other crazy movies. And we actually got to see the remake of Evil Dead. It's pretty good. You should go check it out when it comes out. And all sorts of crazy things. Ralph wasn't just a nerd. He was the original cool nerd. Ralph makes a killing in mobile right now, and if you look up one of his games, it's called Brick Buddies. Now, I think it started off as a joke, because much like the pet rock, you have a pet brick. This is true. Look it up on the App Store. And you can then buy a cake for your brick, or a sombrero, or beads, and you can give it all sorts of, and you can stroke it and level up your brick, and your brick gets happier. He's made a lot of money on this thing. And I'm like, so I'm on Facebook, and Ian Bogostu made Cow Clicker, which actually became a hit, but it was meant to be an ironic game. And then Ralph, I'm like, you guys need to hang out because you're on some next level stuff right here. So needless to say, as a Nintendo fanboy, I stayed up on all things Nintendo. I would wait outside my mailbox waiting for Nintendo Power to come. I can still smell the ink on the pages. When I first saw the Mega Man 2 bosses, my mind was blown. Everything, you know, Howard Phillips and Nestor, all that stuff. And when I first learned of the Nintendo World Championships, I'm like, day freaking one, I'm making it to that. So it turns out it was over at the Worcester Centrum, which is now, when I first learned DCU Center over there, it's still standing. Yeah, everything's corporate name now, you gotta love it. And you had to play 3 games. Those of you who are old enough to remember or have done your homework, you remember it was first Super Mario Brothers level, then Rad Racer, and then the mother of all puzzle games, Tetris. Still, Tetris is awesome. I still love it when we play it. Ralph and I showed up there, and we were blown away. It was absolutely incredible. What Nintendo had done intelligently was they had made a mini convention, a mini version of PAX, or E3, or CES, this mecca, where a generation of kids could come and see the new games, and more importantly, compete with each other. That was the key. I went in and I started doing my thing in a whirlwind that went by in a blink. I wound up advancing. Before I knew it, I was in the finals with this other kid named Jason. This was seriously, this was the Wizard. The bad Fred Savage movie. Don't look it up if you haven't seen it. Needless to say, I choked. I can tell you I won, but I absolutely choked. You know, I never liked the controls in Rad Racer. It was a terrible game. I'm going to say it right now. It was like Nintendo's like, racing, we need one of those. Let's make it Rad Racer because it's radical. I'm bitter over that. Jason pulled ahead in Tetris, and I lost. The damage was done. For my troubles and my efforts, I got a free copy of Super Mario Bros. 3. Pretty good at the time, right? It's a, you know, a good thing to score. And Jason went on for the rest of his life, and that was that. The big thing was I had tasted several things that day. I tasted the glitz and glamour of a video game convention. I'd later be addicted to PAX, E3, GDC, and all of these shows. I love them. Every time I go to them, I see friends that I haven't seen in years. It's amazing. I'd learned the thrill of competition and the agony of defeat. And the skills that I had and learned playing that game in front of that crowd would directly translate to later when I would have to demo Gears of War at E3 in front of thousands of journalists. I also learned that in order to win, you have to lose first, in order to have that hunger to make you win. The other thing I earned was pride from my father. I remember to this day clearly that he said, Cliffy, maybe there is something to this video game thing. Well, Dad, if you're looking down, turns out there was. I never did buy that Nintendo World Championship cartridge that went for like 15 grand on eBay a couple years ago. I think some things maybe left in the past. Time to talk about giant frogs. I'm gonna pee really bad when I get out of here. So there I was, this high school kid about to go into sophomore year, constantly burning through games like Taylor Swift burned through her boyfriends. It's funny because it's true. I had a poster on the back of my bedroom door, I swear, and I wish I still had this. It said games I'd beat. And I'd finish a game, and it'd be like, a winner is you. And I'm like, all right. I'd take the marker, go over, Ninja Gaiden, Rygar, all these games. So the other thing I started to do was to take a Sharpie on the side of my Nintendo and mark off hash marks like a freaking fighter pilot. And that's the actual Nintendo. You can see there's a Mario sticker on there, there's a Zelda sticker, another Mario one as well. And I still have that in a box at my house. I'm going to put it up somewhere and kind of frame it as like my own personal history, because I had a lot of spare time back then, apparently. There's one game I couldn't beat called Athena by SNK. It was the buggiest pile of crap you've ever seen. Like halfway through the game, kill screens would start popping up, and like pixels would start vanishing, and the game would slow down, the frame rate. I still hate this game to this day. I wish it never existed, and it was the bane of my existence. I hate you, Athena. But actually, there's another game I never beat. It was this game called Blaster Master. It was one of those perfect, here's the experience you as a suburban kid wish you had. Now let me walk you through this real quick, for those of you who don't know. Okay, I'm going to put down the slide clicker for a second. Now, I didn't create this image, by the way. Turns out I wasn't the only one who had this thought about this opening cinematic. Thanks to saving the work, dude, at IGN. So here's a boy, a suburban kid. He's got a frog. I'm like, oh my God, that's me. I have frogs. I collect frogs. And he has the frog in what looks like this giant BJ's tub of mayonnaise. It's not a very big terrarium, by the way, and that's a pretty big frog. The frog's like, kill me now. One day, the frog jumps out, and the kid's like, oh no, froggy. And I'm like, dude, if you have a frog, you put a lid on it. And poke some holes or the frog's gonna die. This is basic kid frog logic 101, people. So the frog then jumps out to the front yard, top right panel, where there happens to be a Maytag washer filled with nuclear waste. And also, I love that the pixel artist put this like crater around it, like it fell from a military plane or something. And the frog's like, sweet, nuclear waste. And he jumps over and he goes towards the nuclear waste. And he jumps on top of it. And he doubles in size immediately because, duh, that's what happens when you touch nuclear waste. Then the frog proceeds to go to this hole a few feet away, which is like a 100-foot hole next to the nuclear waste in the front yard. I'm like, what are these people living in Sinkhole, Florida? What is going on right now? The kid lands safely, ba-boom, doesn't break a leg, nothing, he's fine. Whereas right in front of him, there's a giant combination monster truck tank. Brand new, keys in the ignition, and a hazmat suit. Yeah, and then he goes in this underground adventure, fighting giant frogs and lizards and doing all sorts of awesome stuff. And I think I just realized where I got the idea for the hollow. Cool, it all makes sense now. Got it. That was amazing. So I was about halfway through playing this amazing game when my brother comes upstairs on that beautiful August day and he tells me, Dad's had a heart attack. We have to go to the hospital. By the time we scooped up my mother in the car and made it there, the doctor came to us and informed us of his time of death. And I didn't have a good image for this, so I went with Field of Dreams because it's like a daddy movie or something. This was a tough adjustment for me for a few years. My mother scooped us up and moved us to Southern California, which I thought was going to be like Beverly Hills 90210, and we'd hang out at the Peach Pit with Dylan, right? No, it wasn't like that at all. I had to make some new friends. I had to start all over. Halfway through high school, this was rough. So what did I do? I had my mother take me to this new store called Target, which was new at the time, and I picked up a Super Nintendo. I'm like, this was right around the time Super Mario World came out. You know what? I might have been a junior in high school, but I wasn't going to stop gaming. I wasn't going to leave my first love behind. Thankfully, I also had this really cool uncle who was building his own PCs, and he hooked me up with this sweet 386 SX. Yeah, look at that sexy beast. Monitor was the size of a toaster. So it was on this PC I started making my own games, and in high school I was doing my schoolwork, I was making my games, I was participating in drama, and yes, I worked at McDonald's for a year. Now, if you haven't worked in fast food and you're a kid, you should. It will teach you a lot about hard work and how to respect people, so if you ever go through that drive-thru, you're not a dick. I would not trade that for the world. It was actually a relatively fun job. So the irony of my father's death that I later realized was that if my father had lived, he probably would have forced me to go to Northeastern University and become an engineer of some sorts and never actually get to make video games. It took me a while to come to grips with that. It also took me a while to come to grips with the fact that, yes, I think my father would have actually been proud of everything that I've done, except for the launch of Gears 2's multiplayer. We fixed it. Well, their problem now. It's time to talk about love. Talk about, it's funny now, before I go into this I didn't even rehearse this part. It's so amazing to see nerd couples out there, just and the fact that people are finding each other on Xbox Live, and people from Gears, they come up to me and they'd be like, oh my God, we met in Gears and now we're getting married. And I'm like, you're welcome, I don't know, can I come to the wedding? So those of you who've read my blog or followed my life know I've had my share of relationships and everything. I even had a prior marriage, right? We learn balance by falling. But in order to fully frame things for this, I want to take you back to the time when I was 12 years old. I was in love with gaming at that point, and I'd always try and find an arcade. And my mother and father used to occasionally take the family to Martha's Vineyard. For those of you who don't know, it's a beautiful island off the coast of Massachusetts. Nantucket's its sister island. And it's really an amazing place to go. Not now, because the weather sucks, but in the spring and summer, it's really magical. I'd highly recommend it. And so when I go there, I'd go to Katana's South Shores, and I'd hunt for crabs. I'd look for, turtles in the pool next to the pond. And I'd read Piers Anthony Xanth books, and I'd go by the local arcade. There's this one moment I will never, ever forget. I'm in the arcade doing my thing with my giant pocket full of quarters, and there's this older girl, probably a teenager, and she's jamming on Shinobi. Those of you, again, who don't remember, Shinobi was one of the first ninja games, and it was amazing. It was another amazing ninja experience, shurikens, everything, right? There was a bonus stage where ninjas were coming at you, and you're like, holy crap, I gotta kill the ninjas, right? I'm watching her, and she's killing it. She's a ninja herself. She was amazing at this game. She was unstoppable, and I was in love. Cut to years later when I'm much, much older, and I hear about this Miss Video Game competition in 2007, very controversial at the time. I'm like, what is this, some sort of beauty pageant for booth babes or something like that? Turns out it wasn't. These girls were actually jamming on real games and fighting over each other and trying to win this thing, and when the dust cleared, this beautiful little blonde girl smoked them all. Lauren Bergeron, aka Leet Lauren. I sat there at my work monitor, and I said to myself, someday I'm gonna make that girl my new girlfriend. This is all 100% true. So, honestly, I didn't know if we'd connect. I didn't really know her. She didn't know me. I just knew that she was this beautiful nerd, and I had to meet her someday. Years later, eventually, I reached out to her online, and she didn't know who I was. It turns out she knew who a lot of the pro gamers were. I think Fatality was trying to roll up on her at the time. I love you, Jonathan. So she was actually working at id Software, of all places, as a freaking build manager. I'm like, holy crap, really? And my first reaction is, I can't talk to you anymore. Epic and id are bitter rivals. Talk to you later. I let her sit and stew in that for 2 full days. And she's like, what the hell? Like, what, she doesn't like me? What is this? This was like years ago. And so, needless to say, I started talking to her and we clicked immediately. I brought her to Raleigh for 19 weekends in a row, long distance. She's racked up a lot of miles on that airline, and that was from Dallas. I knew that she was the woman I was going to marry when I took her to Comic-Con after dating for a month or so. See, conventions, frogs, ninjas, there's themes here. We were leaving the convention center one evening, walking back to the hotel on that beautiful San Diego night, and I hear from behind me, yo, Cliffy, what's up? I'm like, hey, man. Turns out these are these guys who wanted to have us come check something out. Guys from an LA mailing list who work in promotions. These guys were responsible for promoting the upcoming Tron film at Comic-Con, and what they had done was rented out a warehouse space and converted it completely into Flynn's Arcade from the movie. It was a huge hit at Comic-Con that year. There were lines out the door. Well, it turns out it wasn't open yet, and these guys were giving us the hookup and wanted us to have early access, just us, a whole arcade to ourselves. So there we were in this surreal location in San Diego, all by ourselves, just jamming on old school arcade games together. It was sweet. We didn't need quarters, too. It was all free. And after playing for a while, the folks then revealed the coup d'etat, where they actually had the secret passage from the movie behind the Tron arcade machine, And we went back there, and there was like a light cycle, a giant freaking light cycle. It was beautiful. It was an incredible experience. We giggled like teenagers, and we had a blast that night. It really felt like a scene from a romantic movie or something, a big, giant, nerdy romantic movie. Finally, when id Software told her, Lauren, we got to ship Rage. You got to cut out the travel. I'm like, wait a minute. Let's quit the job, move in with me. So I pulled the trigger. She moved in, and we later married in the city we fell in love in, San Diego, with all of our friends. Wonderful, wonderful town. Thank you. I got to say, I just got chills from that. That was cool. All of our friends were there. It was a really weird mix. You should have seen it. I mean, it was like Raleigh friends, family, LA types, technology types. And that moment where you're sitting there at your own wedding and you see Tim Schafer hanging out and chatting with Isaiah Mustafa, the Old Spice guy, you're like, this is insane. Once Lauren and I started dating, I quickly learned her birthday, August 17th, 1987. High five. And so I'm prepping this talk, and I have this really weird epiphany that I realized that was roughly around the time we were at Martha's Vineyard when I was 12. And there's a very good chance that my wife came into this world when I had the epiphany that I wanted to eventually marry a gamer girl. Now, this is creepy for two reasons. First off, the fact that, wow, that overlap might have happened. Like, was there some butterfly effect that happened that day? Second off, the fact that I'm so much older and she's so much younger. That's only 12 years, come on. So now I'd like to talk about the love of the game for a minute. And hydration. I happen to be fortunate enough to be very, very good friends with a very powerful Hollywood executive who shall not be named. And this is a guy who really gets it. He gets that games are amazing, he loves sci-fi, comic books, all of it. And if you do your homework, you might be able to figure out who he is. And it's one of those things that he tells me stories when he goes to conventions like PAX or Comic-Con, and he brings other film executives from other studios, and they'll go walk the floor in their suits, check everything out. And your average executive's like, look at that nerd in that costume. Look, it's Fat Princess Leia. Look at that. Oh, look, Twilight, we need one of those, right? Oh, yeah, because that's how it works, dude. And I sit there and I hear that, and it breaks my heart, because my friend, the executive who gets it, looks at the other guys and he's like, you guys just don't get it, do you? Those executives who are clueless, they don't see the labor of love. They don't see the hundreds of hours that a cosplay put into their work, accidentally cutting, poking, and burning themselves to make this costume. This was a character that touched them so much that they'd want to be around their peers as this character. Strangers, they'd go to another city just to show off their love of the game. And then that moment when one of those cosplayers is able to meet the creator of their favorite character, that is pure magic. Ken Levine and I have become good friends over the years. We're actually going to have dinner tomorrow night, but we're going to first be at the Irrational Fan Meetup. And I'm just so thrilled to see that moment where the girl who dresses up as Elizabeth, or I want to see how somebody pulls off the Songbird, or the Big Daddies, or the Little Sisters come up and they get to meet him and say hi and get a photo. For me, that's the pure magic. So when I look out here and I see all of your smiling faces, I realize that games aren't just experiences or services. They're almost really a religion. And by this comment, I don't mean to insult religion. Reddit atheism army, you guys calm down. I know you're angry. So angry! I'm so intolerant about your intolerance. I realized that for me, my personal religion is pretty much technology and games. I worship the pixel. I believe that technology has set us free, and video games in our culture are a wonderful, beautiful, unifying force. So in conclusion, what have video games done for me and what do they mean to me? Well, let's go through it quickly. They've provided endless hours of entertainment for me. They've taught me the difference between fantasy and reality. They've yielded an incredibly fruitful career that I'm very thankful for. They've given me many, many friends, all of whom I love very dearly. And they've given me the love of my life. And they showed my father, who passed all too soon, something I could do that he would be proud of. The average age of a gamer is about 38 now, which means many gamers are parents who are raising this next generation of gamers. That moment when I'm at a show like this and I see the dad dressed up in cosplay and he's got his little 8-year-old dressed up, I'm just like, squee, it's amazing. Now, I want to ask all of you a question. If video games were somehow tied to increased aggression, wouldn't we see fights spilling into the hallways at these shows? Fist fights? people kicking each other in the head. That's the funny thing about PAX, Comic-Con, DragonCon, WonderCon, all of it. With the exception of one notable event at Comic-Con involving a pencil a few years ago that I'm not going to bring up, how many physical altercations or fistfights do you actually think we're going to see this week? Now take your average sporting event, and I'll ask you the same question. Now look, I'm not trying to knock sports. Hell, I've learned to love football. I love hockey. I grew up with it. Hell, I'll even go to an MMA match and be like, kick his ass, Seabass, right? But we need to be reasonable here. We as gamers are by and large an incredibly peaceful nation. So you'll understand why I get a little bit offended when the medium that I've loved my entire life and has shaped who the man I am comes under fire by out-of-touch white people looking for ratings. We should all when this happens, we should all be incredibly offended, and we should also push back together whenever our medium we love is challenged. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go finish Blaster Master. Thanks, guys. Go play some games.